Hello and welcome back to Taliesin's map and our deity chart Mythstream series that we were doing. Arno is here with me today, and we are hoping that Josephus will join in a little bit after he's done eating. So today we wanted to look at the deity type known as Yama in the Vedas, in the Rig Veda. Um, and just known as the Lord of the Dead in some sense in the other Indo-European branches. So one of the issues is, of course, what is meant by this specific type of god, this specific Lord of the Dead, because we do see different sort of rulers of the underworld, different lords of the dead in different capacities. Maybe a god who is the embodiment of death itself, maybe a god who is um this or that, a different role in the underworld. So trying to kind of like distill and pinpoint what exactly the Yama type is in terms of being Lord of the Dead will be part of what we can hopefully look at. And just the main myth themes that keep recurring with this deity type that can help us to confidently say that yes, if we look in the European branches, this is the same type as Yama, and this is the same type, and that should hopefully be clarifying, because the underworld, the land of the dead, it's an important concept in the cosmology, the overall world picture of this mythos, this spread out mythos, and we need to sort of understand this role, as well as, of course, Yama. The name Yama, it's this name that's been caught up in and dragged into the sort of Yimo and Manis debacle that exists in Indo-European comparative mythology. So kind of showing how the Yama type, it's its own separate thing with a very defined role. It's not the same as Ymir. That's a sort of linguistic tangent or coincidence. But rather, we'll hopefully be able to show the mythemes that point to a different deity type in these European examples. So to begin with, let's just look at our Rig Veda material as we do to get an idea of the Yama type. So to begin with, we have our chart, of course, and this shows that we're going to be looking at Yama, and then in the Avesta material, Yima, and then in the Greek material, I want to look at Orpheus in particular, but also Hades. It's just sort of complex or fine, fine sort of a difficult issue, right, between Orpheus and Hades. But there are reasons I want to put forward that Orpheus might have more of the consistent Yama type narrative myths, at least, and then the Welsh Bran, the Irish Down, and the Norse Mimir. So let's remove this and get started. All right, so this is the hymn to the Rig Veda 10, hymn number 14, and this is the Griffith translation. So there are three hymns to Yama, basically three main hymns, at least, in Mandala 10 of the Rig Veda, and they are at least two of them are primarily like funeral hymns. So from that context, you can understand that the references that are being made to the path that the forefathers went on, this is immediately and explicitly pointing to the path that they went on in death. It is the path of death, the path of the ancestors, the fathers. And so there's this concept of the Pitriyana, that's the path of the fathers, the Pitris. And it is this auspicious path to go in death, to go to the land of the fathers, to sort of sort of divine fathers, the Petries. It's not just, these are not just mundane human fathers. They're kind of been given a divine role. They've become like gods. So to go to that land is what is being described here. And Yama is often in the same place as the Petries somehow. Their locations are overlapping. So we'll see that as this develops. Okay, so honor the king with thine oblations, Yama, Vivasvan's son, who gathers men together, who traveled to the lofty heights above us, who searches out and shows the path to many. Yama first found for us a place to dwell in. This pasture never can be taken from us. Men born on earth tread their own paths that lead them whither our ancient fathers have departed. Mitali prospers there with Kavyas, Yama with Angiras's sons, Brihaspati with Rikvans, exalters of the gods, by gods exalted. Some joy in praise, and some in our oblation. Come, seat thee on this bed of grass, O Yama, in company with the Angirases and fathers. Let texts recited by the sages bring thee, O king. Let this oblation make thee joyful. Come, Yama, with the Angirases, the holy, rejoice thee here with children of Virupa. To sit on sacred grass at this our worship, I call Vivasvan too, thy father hither. Our fathers are Angirases, Navagvas, Atharvans, Brigus, who deserve the Soma. May these, the holy, look on us with favor. May we enjoy their gracious, loving kindness. Go forth, upon the ancient pathways, whereon our sires of old have gone before us. Mere shalt thou look on both the kings enjoying their sacred food, God Varuna and Yama. Meet Yama, meet the fathers, meet the merit of free or ordered acts in highest heaven. Leave sin and evil, seek anew thy dwelling, and bright with glory wear another body. Go hence, depart ye, fly in all directions. This place for him the fathers have provided. Yama bestows on him a place to rest in, adorned with days and beams of light and waters. Run and outspeed the two dogs, Sarama's offspring, brindled, four-eyed, upon thy happy pathway. Draw nigh then to the gracious-minded fathers, where they rejoice in company with Yama. And those two dogs of thine, Yama, the watchers, four-eyed, who look on men and guard the pathway. Entrust this man, O king, to their protection, and with prosperity and health endow him. Dark-hued, insatiate, with distended nostrils, Yama's two envoys roam among the people. May they restore to us a fair existence here and today, that we may see the sunlight. To Yama pour the Soma, bring to Yama consecrated gifts. To Yama sacrifice prepared and heralded by Agni goes. Offer to Yama holy gifts, enriched with butter, and draw near. So may he grant that we may live long days of life among the gods. Offer to Yama, to the king, oblation very rich in meath. Bow down before the rishis of the ancient times, who made this path in days of old. Into the six expanses flies the great one, in Trikadrukas. The Gayatri, the Trishtub, all meters in Yama are contained. Okay, so this paints the picture pretty fully, actually, of the idea of Yama's realm, of what is kind of going on. In some sense, there are these sort of dogs, which remind us of classic ideas of underworld locations, with the fearsome dogs that seem to be roaming around or guarding. And there is this repeated mention of our sacrifices and oblations being given to these forefathers, as well as to the gods who are there, right? So it seems like there's a concept here of offerings to the Petries, to the fathers. I think that kind of came through in that hymn, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's kind of it's a nice semi-comprehensive hymn to get the idea across of Yama's realm, which is kind of nice. obviously there's a lot that is not said, but it gives a good gist. Okay, so um, and one interesting thing is that it seems like Varuna and Yama are mentioned together there in this hymn. That's interesting because in other places, Varuna really is the god of death, the god of the underworld. So there's this kind of complication where Yama has his own uh, location, right? Somehow overlapping with the Petries. But then Varuna also, like, he is the lord of the night, of the darkness, and the primordial waters. And this gets kind of mapped onto the underworld itself. So, in a sense, Varuna is like the overruler of the underworld, which is quite interesting. He's the yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to disentangle that, but especially in the Brahmanas, Varuna very much is like the god of death. Like he is bringing death as well. Whereas Yama isn't really bringing death. He's kind of like leading the way, and then um, he has his seat in his underworld location, and uh, yeah, it's a positively associated place for the most part, I think. So, and we'll kind of see that in the comparisons, I think, to Yama in the European branches, that the locations associated with the equivalent figures often have positive connections. So it's kind of like I think well, we'll see what we think about that question, right? Whether it's like purely positive or not. But at least in this hymn, the Yama location is quite positive. And another thing to bring up is Arno and I were just talking about this yesterday, how scholars of the Vedas have traced the development of these ideas of the afterlife, of the underworld, the afterlife, of Yama's realm. And we were reading from Hank Bodowitz's book, Vedic Cosmology and Ethics. And he argues, following from Hermann Oldenburg, who's kind of a giant of 19th century Vedic scholarship. But following from Oldenburg, he argues that basically this hymn is in the 10th mandala, so the very last mandala, the latest mandala of the Rig Veda. And he says that there's no sign of Yama's realm or any afterlife realm being like celestial, like in the heavens, until the latest layer of the Rig Veda, perhaps. And so he thinks that originally Yama's realm was subterranean, and that it kind of became associated with the heavens only later in the Rig Veda, as we can see. So this is another open question, right? But we'll also see how we can compare that, I think, to European instances, right? We can kind of see what they tell us about where Bran's location is, or Down's location, and I think at least in the stories it points to it being terrestrial or subterranean across the board. So that could lend some validity to this interpretation that Yama's realm may have originally been earthly or subterranean as well, and then kind of became associated with the celestial. But it does seem like, as I was saying yesterday, that there's a consistency of it being a positive place, I think, nonetheless. Okay, so yeah, let's jump to the next Vedic hymn. Would you like to read this next one that I pull up here, Arno? I'll just get it ready.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. Oops. All right. Okay, I'll let me scroll down a bit. Oh, it's just a short one. All right, go for it.
In the tree clothed with goodly leaves, where Yama drinketh with the gods, the Father, master of the house, tendeth with love our ancient sires. I looked reluctantly on him who cherishes those men of old, on him who treads that evil path, and then I yearned for this again. Thou mountest, thou dost not see, O child, the new and wheelless car, which thou hast fashioned mentally, one poled, but turning every way. The car which thou hast made to roll hitherward from the sage's child. This hath the Saman followed close, hence laid together on a ship. Who was the father of the child? Who made the chariot roll away? Who will this day declare to us how the funeral gift was made? When the funeral gift was placed, straightway the point of flame appeared. A depth extended in the front, a passage out was made behind. Here is the seat where Yama dwells, that which is called the home of gods. Here minstrels blow the flute for him. Here he is glorified with songs.
Right. Yeah, very nice. It's very mystical and yeah, impactful for a short funeral hymn. You can feel the sort of solemn mystical energy, I think, in that one. And yeah, this is portrayed as kind of like a dialogue between a father and son, at least how Jameson and Burton translate it. Let me see if I can get this real quick. 1 second here. Oh, whoops. So basically, Jameson and Burton give a long description or explanation of this hymn. So I wanted to look at it. So it says, both baffling and deeply engrossing, this hymn has given rise to a multitude of interpretations, none of which produces a completely satisfactory reading. Without discussing previous interpretations, we will add our own. It is generally but not universally agreed that it concerns death, either that of a boy or that of his father, and the journey to or from the realm of Yama, the ruler of the dead. Both a boy and a father are explicitly mentioned in the hymn, and we follow those who consider the dead man to be the father. The pleasant place over which Yama has domain is described in the first and last verses. In the first verse, the dead person is traveling there, while in the last he seems to have reached it successfully. The first two verses appear to be spoken by the boy whose father has just died. He imagines his father's journey to Yama, and in verse 2 he displays a psychologically plausible ambivalence. He longs to see his father again, but recoils from even the thought of following him on his roll to the realm of the dead. The solution to his psychological dilemma seems to be given in verse 3 to 4. The boy creates a mental chariot without wheels that he mounts without seeing it, and presumably this vehicle carries him to his father without the rigors of the journey. To us, this mental conveyance suggests a dream, and many of us have experienced such reunions with the beloved dead in dreams. But the chariot can also be, and in verse 4 more likely is, the ritual, quite possibly the correctly performed funeral service for his father. The real problems in this hymn are found in verse 5 to 6, particularly the word anudei. Although the word is a transparent gerundive in the feminine, formed in the lexeme anu da, hand over or concede, and should therefore mean to be handed over or conceded, its exact usage is completely unclear. Its only other occurrence is in the wedding hymn, that's 10.85, Surya's Bridal, where it appears to refer to a bridesmaid or female servant of the bride, who is to accompany her to her new home. Okay, so they discuss the meaning of this word a bit more. Our own interpretation is informed by the use of the lexeme in an Atharva Veda passage, that is Atharva Veda 6.118, a passage found in various versions, also in the Paipalada recension of the Atharva Veda, in the Maitrayani Samhita, and in the Taittiriya Aranyaka. In this passage, the speaker asks for his offenses, his debts, rinya, to be forgiven, using the verb anuda. And he seeks for this to happen before he enters Yama's world. Okay, so talking about debts being forgiven before entering Yama's world. The part of this passage concerning Yama's world is read variously in the various texts and has clearly been subject to corruption, but in most readings, the person in question fears entering Yama's world with a rope on, a rope presumably imposed by his debts. Reading our passage with these passages in mind, we may speculate that verse 5 and 6 find the father arriving at Yama's world with the same anxiety apparent in the passages just referred to, that he will be called to account for the debts he owes and must prove that they have been repaid or forgiven before he enters that realm. The Taittiriya Samhita already knows the three debts, also rinya, with which a Brahmin is born: studentship to the rishis, sacrifice to the gods, and sons for his ancestors. Although we see no trace of studentship in this hymn, the two questions in the first half of verse 5 provide implicit answers about the other two debts. The dead man begat a son, and he and or the son also sent forth the chariot of sacrifice. Satisfactory answers about these debts clear the way for the father to enter Yama's realm in verse 6, and it may in fact be Yama who is asking the questions. Several questions remain, however, since rinya, debt, is a neuter noun. Why is anu Deity feminine in gender? There are no obvious feminine reference in this hymn that could underlie this adjective. For this problem, the Atharvaveda passage provides a clue. As was noted above, the protagonist in that passage fears entering Yama's world with a rope on, with the rope representing his unpaid debts. The word raju, rope, is feminine, and we suggest that this symbolic representation is the referent of anu Deity, a more literal rendering than that given in the translation below would be the rope/fetter of debt to be forgiven. Even in this interpretation, verse 6 remains somewhat puzzling, though the overall impression made by the last three padas is that of the enlargement of space. Here the clue is found in the final pada, in the word nirayanam, coming forth, and this word is almost entirely confined in the Rig Veda to birth contexts, to coming forth from the womb. And in 10.60.7, it is used not of an original birth, but of a symbolic rebirth, recalling a sick man to life. We suggest that here too a rebirth is at issue, but this time it is the rebirth into a happy life in Yama's world, where the dead man will be reunited with his body and partake of the pleasures hinted at in verses 1 and 7, as well as in, for example, 10.14, the reuniting with the body after death in a distant realm is treated at length in 10.56, where it is also likened to birth. The rebirth in our verse is somewhat graphically depicted, with the head of the infant coming out first, then the rest of his body until the coming forth is completed. Or alternatively, the nirayanyam may actually refer to the afterbirth. The last verse announces the dead and now reborn man's arrival at Yama's delightful seat, with the emphatic annunciatory pronouns idam, iyam, ayam, all meaning here is this one right here. The promise of verse 1 has finally been fulfilled. Okay, so I think that's useful context to kind of understand the picture that they had of death and what it entails and how one gets to Yama's realm and what that means and the relationship, between father and children and that sort of thing, the child and the father and all of that. It's in a very fascinating picture that it's painting. So hopefully that is helpful. Let's just kind of move on to our next piece of data then from there and see what we can build on. Did we think, I guess Josephus is not quite ready yet, so we can't go to Veiois. So we could go to
No,
the
but
Avesta.
that hymn you had me read, we were just talking before about whether or not the splendorous afterlife of Yama, the realm of the fathers, was moved to the heavens.
Mhm.
At the end of that hymn, you have here, a depth extended in the front, a passage out was made behind, right there in the second half of line 6.
Mhm.
That just made me think that, and we'll go over I'll probably try to pull up the quote a little bit later about how Yama's realm and the actual heavens themselves, or the paradisical afterlife, function very similarly to how hell and Valhalla do. But we'll do that a little bit later. But I wonder if I don't know for sure if that is evidence that Yama's realm was originally in the underworld. The underworld doesn't really have a specific name in the Vedas. It's given descriptive names like the depth and darkness rather than like an actual place name. Um, and also, this a depth extended in front and a passage out was made behind also does bring to mind the Orpheus story, but I have no idea if that has
Hmm.
any legitimate
Fantastic.
significance there. But
Mhm. Possible.
we can move to the Iranian stuff. I didn't have the Avesta hymn pulled up, but I do have
Yeah, let me
Shahnameh.
just a moment here. Before that, let's see. So the other thing I should quickly mention though is Yama and Yami. So Yami is the sister, like the twin sisters, presumably of Yama. They've got these matching names, twin-like names, and there's this whole thing with Yami apparently trying to seduce her brother Yama, right? And it's just this sort of it is what I would say is, first of all, it is consistent into the Iranic material. So this mytheme also exists in the Iranic material in different permutations around Yima and his sister. And what happens? The story with this is that Yama apparently is one of the gods. He's the son of Vivasvat, which is the sun god. Um, and it's tricky that because Yama and his brother Manu, they're kind of in this gray area where of like demigod slash god, because Manu, his name means man, and in some versions he is the progenitor of mankind and that sort of thing. Um, and so in a sense he's the first man, but it's kind of like this gray area where he's the son of a god and he's kind of divine himself. So is he a demigod? How do you even classify that? And then with Yama in particular, he's kind of in a similar situation because he's like a god, but then he what apparently happens is that his sister Yami in this hymn is trying to convince him that, you know, what is it? Let's see here. Um, well, I Yami am possessed by love of Yama, that I may rest on the same couch beside him. So she's going on about this to Yama and trying to convince him. And it seems that um, what we find is that Yama is said to have given up given up his immortality in order to sire a lineage of sons. And so presumably it's not really clear in this hymn itself, but presumably he gives in to his sister's um, uh, urgings, right? And in some sense, at least somehow, you know, this is one of the things with Yama is that the Rig Veda materials kind of is very fragmentary on Yama. So exactly what detail you can pinpoint is it's kind of hard to 100% say on everything. But there's a famous hymn regarding where I should have actually had this one prepared, but had a bunch of other things on my mind to prepare instead. But one of the key things is that there is a sacrifice given by Brihaspati in a different hymn. And it is said that at the sacrifice of Brihaspati, Yama gave up his own dear life in order to become a father, in order to, for the sake of progeny, for the sake of lineage. Okay, so when you put that together with this Yama Yami hymn, you can kind of see the suggestion that he may have sired children with his sister. And if you compare that to the Avestan material, it kind of suggests that, unless there was a different variation where there's a different woman involved, right? Different ways you could look at that. But in any case, there's this other hymn in the Rig Veda where there's the sacrifice of Brihaspati, and it is said Yama gave up his own dear life at this sacrifice in order to have progeny. So that has been taken as evidence that Yama is being sacrificed at this sacrifice. But that's not what the hymn actually says. And Jameson and Brereton, in their commentary on this verse, say that he's not being sacrificed. It's just that at this sacrifice, which is like a feast, that is where he, in this context, he sired children with, presumably with Yami, right? Okay, so hopefully that gives an idea, a vague idea of the picture of what's happening in the background, which will also, there will be variations on that in the Avesta material. What's interesting about this also is the sort of echoes or similarities between this picture and the Adam and Eve material, I think. So this, of course, between Manu and Yama, one or both of them are called like the first ancestor of mankind because of what I just described. Manu his name means man, and he, in some versions, he is the sort of the first ancestor, but in others, it's actually Yama. And there's a division within the Rig Veda itself. Different poets treat Yama or Manu as the primary ancestor. And Rig Veda scholars have commented on this pretty extensively. For example, Michael Witzel, talking about the Mandala 7, which is by Vasishtha and his clan, says that Vasishtha treats Yama as actually the first ancestor instead of Manu, and that he says that is, it seems like a more Iranic angle. So he thinks that Vasishtha could have been coming from Iran into Vedic society and bringing this concept that it was actually Yama that was the first man, in a sense, rather than Manu. So there's this concept to understand in the background there of the first man, right? But in any case, you can see in the story of Yama that he has immortality. He is then tempted by this female counterpart. She's tempting him with a sinful, against Dharma kind of action. And he gives into it, presumably, and by doing so, he gives up his immortality, actually. He gives up immortality, sacrifices it, and that is kind of the picture that you can put together with the Vedic material. Now, there's a second layer to this that is comparable to the Adam and Eve material that I'll mention, which is that in the Iranic material, hopefully we'll look at it, there's also this food that it's the food of extended life or immortality, and it is tabooed. It is a tabooed meat because in that society it is actually meat, and Yima is accessing this taboo meat, right, against the prohibitions, and so this ties into this as well. So you can kind of see these separate concepts of the female who's taboo urging, and then the food that's taboo that extends life. They're all circling around this Yima and Yama type. So for this reason, there have been people who have commented on the similarity of Yama and Yima to Adam and Eve. But of course, what I just described, it's not a one-to-one. There's no fruit tree. It's not so simplified. There are many things you could say are different, right? But you can kind of see, if anybody is similar to Adam and Eve, it's probably this picture of Yama. He's described as being in his tree, like as if he's in a sort of grove, or in Yama's tree he sits, and here he is with a female who's trying to tempt him to a sort of sinful act. There have been plenty of commentaries who think that the Adam and Eve tempting of the fruit has a double meaning of a sexual or some sort of sexual sin undertone as well. There is the whole concept that Adam and Eve are split from one being, and so that they are like siblings, right? Eve is like the from the rib of Adam, so that could be like the Yama and Yami. So there's lots of ways you can compare these things. I just want to get that across as we go into the Iranic stuff, where this mythos will, of course, is a bit more expanded in the Iranic material. In the Vedic material, I don't know of any point where they're eating a food that is tabooed and it's like a life-giving food. So somehow that material, it's either just lost over the centuries or it wasn't there in the Rig Vedic time. I'm not really sure. There is an interesting story of Varuna. Again, remember Varuna is the other like god of death, so that's interesting. But Varuna um, has this barley, and he, the gods are not supposed to eat it. The other gods, and they break Varuna's rule, and they eat Varuna's barley. They then have to do this ritual act of sort of penance to purify themselves, and they actually have to like speak their crime, speak their sin. Okay, and this gets ritualized into one of the rituals in the Shatapatha Brahmana called the Varuna Pragasha, and that word just means like the Varuna's barley ritual, because it is reenacting sort of the confessing of the crime of eating Varuna's barley, because then Varuna basically smites or strikes the gods with death and disease and the closing up of wombs, all of this stuff, sterility, because he's like this god of death and disease, dropsy, and so the gods are caught in Varuna's noose. He is the punisher of um, sins and of rules, and so that is Varuna's noose. He has the gods trapped, and to be released from the noose, they have to do this confession. So to me, that is like somewhat similar to the sort of original sin of eating the food of, right, the taboo food. It's kind of, that seems like the most similar sort of survival of that concept, but it's associated with Varna. So I'm not sure if that's from the same root or not, but it's worth throwing in there as we go forward. So keep that in mind. It could be also from a different original myth, and with just like a parallel or similar concept, of course. Okay. All right. So let's go look at the Avesta material to try to keep that ball rolling and keep those concepts in mind. All right. All right. So here's basically the primary section on Yama, and yeah, since I've been talking a lot, would you like to read that, or do you want me to read it and then you comment, or what do you think? Do you want to give that a read?
Um,
What do you think?
yeah, what section is that? Just in case I don't think I have that pulled up.
Well, it's Zam Yash. It's Yash 19 of the Corda Avesta, and then verse 31.
I do have that up actually, so I'll just read that from my screen.
Cool.
31. Okay, you want me to read all the way through 38?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Gotcha. That clave unto the bright Yama, which bright Yama right there is Yama Shaita, which becomes Jamshid, the good shepherd, for a long time while he ruled over the 7 Karshvares of the earth. That's basically just the whole entire earth was separated into 7 different pieces of land. It's like a totality, like he ruled over the whole land. Over the Devas, in this case demons and men, the Yatus and Parikas, the oppressors, the blind, and the deaf. He took from the Devas both riches and welfare, both fatness and flocks, both weal and glory, in whose reign both ailments were never failing for feeding creatures. Flocks and men were undying, waters and plants were undrying. In whose reign there was neither cold wind nor hot wind, neither old age nor death, nor envy made by the Devas, in the times before his lie, before he began to have delight in words of falsehood and untruth. So that's foreshadowing that he will eventually be dishonest and lose his Farena or glory, sovereignty. But when he began to find delights in words of falsehood and untruth, the glory was seen to flee away from him in the shape of a bird. When his glory had disappeared, then the great Yama, which does also evoke imagery of Orpheus and Eurydice. Shaita, the good shepherd, It's continuing right there. Yima Shaita, the good shepherd, trembled and was in sorrow before his foes. He was confounded and laid him down on the ground. The first time when the glory departed from the bright Yima, the glory went from Yima, the son of Vivanghat, in the shape of a Varangha bird. Then Mithra seized that glory. Mithra, the lord of wide pastures, whose ear is quick to hear, who has 1,000 senses. We sacrifice unto Mithra, the lord of all countries, whom Ahura Mazda has created, the most glorious of all the gods in the heavens. The second time, when the glory departed from the bright Yima, the glory rent from Yima, the son of Vivanghat, in the shape of a Varangha bird. Then Thraitona seized that glory, he, the heir of the valiant Athwa clan, who was the most victorious of all victorious men next to Zarathustra, who smote Ajidahaka, the three-mouthed, the three-headed, the six-eyed, who had 1,000 senses, that most powerful, fiendish Drug, that demon baleful to the world, the strongest Drug that Angramanyu created against the material world, to destroy the world of the good principle. The third time when the glory departed from the bright Yima, the glory that went from Yima son of Vivanghat in the shape of a Varangha bird. Then the manly-hearted Keresaspa seized that glory. He who is the sturdiest of the men in strength, next to Zarathustra, for his manly courage. For manly courage clave unto him. We worship manly courage, firm or foot, unsleeping, quick to rise, and fully awake, that clave unto Keresaspa. I'll end it there.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's good stuff. I was going to see if there was a mention of his being killed in here. Okay, here it is. So further down in the same hymn, the glory is being struggled for. The good spirit flung a dart, and so did Vohumano, and Ashavahishta, and Atar, the son of Ahura Mazda. The evil spirit flung a dart, and so did Akemmano, and Aishma, of the wounding spear, and Azidahaka, and Spitura, who sawed Yima in twain. Okay, so this is an important detail. Yima is sawed in twain, and this again has been taken to be the same as Ymir being cut in half. I just really want to emphasize that being sawed in twain, first of all, it's a vague description. Sawed in twain can mean cut right down the stomach. It can mean your head is cut off. It can mean what? Any different number of things. And secondly, lots of figures are sawed in twain in different ways. So this is one of the problems. The context of Yima being sawed in twain is vague enough where people can try to connect that to Ymir, right? And but we've seen that when you understand the figures in full, it falls apart. So hopefully that's what we are going to be doing, understanding Yima on his own terms a bit better, and what this sawed in twain might actually parallel in the European branches, right? Because what we're going to see, of course, if you just looked at the chart I mentioned in the beginning, we have multiple gods in Europe who have their heads cut off, beheaded gods, and they seem to be the ones who mythically parallel Yima much more closely. So to me, that means that Yima being sawed in twain, it comes from the same root as this sort of beheading moment in other places. And that's kind of where the confusion has happened. All right, so we can see that Azidahaka is there when Yima is sawed in twain, apparently, Aishma, Asidaka, and Spitura. Well, it's not, I guess that's not clear. But anyways, Azidahaka is one of the primary opponents of Yima, as also was mentioned up here. If you look at a footnote or endnote number 7, it says, Yima, the good shepherd, trembled and was in sorrow before his foes. And the footnote says that the foes are Azidahaka or Zahak and his followers. All right, so that is interesting. And basically, yeah, we have the death of Yima. It's this important moment. Yama gave up his life to have progeny, all this stuff. is it starts to a picture starts to come together, but it's kind of difficult to trace. So did you have any other particular texts on the Ironic material that you wanted to pull up? If not, I have some quotations from Ironic texts that I wanted to go through, but did you have any other specific ones to look at?
Yeah, there's the Shahnameh. There is another section. So there was a mention of Yma's death in Vendidad 2, where it talks about verse 5.3 or something. I'm in the footnote section of it, talking about the serpent in the river was originally the mythical serpent Azish or whatever, who overthrew and killed the king Yma. But then there's a next section that talks about Jamshid.
Okay.
But I can read instead from the Shahnameh. What I wanted to say first about the section I read, Yash 19. So he loses the sovereignty, the Kfarina, 3 consecutive times, and that's one of, not to get into Yarmwood too much, but that's one of the direct parallels to Yama. He either gains or loses a triple sovereignty. But we already have a video where we go over all that in depth.
No, this is a great point, though. We did go over that in our Diarmid video stream that we've done in the past, but this is great to highlight because, yeah, that's like the main thrust that's repeated over and over again in this passage that you just read. How Yma has this Kfarena, which is the sort of the blessing of the gods. It's like the favor, the chrism, the shining glory of sovereignty. It's this overpowering, it's a good thing. It's like a halo of divinity in a sense that means you are the sovereign, you are favored, and it is powerful. But Yma does a triple sort of lie or something like that. There's different versions throughout the text, but the idea that it was like a lie that he gave seems to be the earliest, as we can see here in this Avestan hymn. And so a sort of triple lie, and after the third time, well, basically he loses the Kfarina in 3 parts, even like each time, like a part of it went away to a different, to someone else, right? And so by the end, he loses his shining glory, and yeah, ultimately he loses his kingship, but he is still seen as this archetypal, divine, ideal sovereign. So it's kind of a funny paradox like that. Similarly with Yama, he, sort of has this sinful thing that he gives into, and then gives up his immortality to become mortal to father a lineage. And then he dies, of course, because he's mortal, but then he's elevated to being the Lord of the Dead because of the fact that by doing that series of things, he becomes the one that forges the path to the Pitriana. He's the one who goes on that path in the hymns that we read. He's the one who went before and made the path basically to the happy underworld and became basically the ruler there, the Lord of the underworld. So in a sense, he's then elevated to being a god once again when he dies and becomes Lord of the underworld. So it's a fascinating kind of back and forth. Ultimately, he's treated like a god, yeah, very interesting. Okay, so was there a Vendidad passage that you have that you want to pull up directly, or?
No, I'm sharing my screen of the Shahnameh.
Okay, let me remove this. All right. Okay, here we go. Got it.
Yeah, so this this is from the Shahnameh talking about Jamshid's reign. So Gayomard is the first, and then Jamshid is the fourth.
And as you mentioned before, Jamshid is Yama Shayeta, or however. And so it's
Yama or Yma Shaita. It's bright Yama.
Yeah, it's quite literally the name that we just saw in the Avesta, Yma Shaeta, but just like
Yeah, the
over
only other
over
person to
time,
have
it just
that.
becomes one. It becomes Jamshid. It's
Yeah,
the same exact name. That's all I want to say.
something interesting. The only other character in or deity in the Iranian pantheon that I'm familiar with that has that Sheed Shaita epithet attached to their name is the sun god Horshid
Yeah,
Shaita.
yeah.
Um,
It practically implies the sun or solarity in
yeah.
some sense. So yeah,
Well, in Iran and India, Yama is the son of Vivasvat or Vanghat, which is a violent form of the sun god. Anyway,
exactly.
so it's very similar. It ties into the Matraic stuff as well, which is what this has to do with. So it's very small. Probably can't read it, but Jamshid succeeds his father Tahmuras as Shah, which means king. And in the Avesta, he's actually Tahmura's brother, and becomes the greatest and most famous of the culture heroes. He continues the work of his predecessors, making additions of his own, and introduces the luxuries and refinements of life. So this is kind of showing the paradisical afterlife aspects of this god, but he gets into more. He divides mankind into four castes or classes. He travels over the world and is the first to cross the sea in ships. Sorry, I'm a bit sick. He aspires to the dominion of the air, obtains it, and lives in ever closer communion with God. Ahriman is rendered powerless, for ill, disease, and death cease, and the world passes through the golden age. This is very similar. The poet who made this was using the Avesta as his foundation. So this is summarizing what you find in there. At length, spoiled by success, Jamshid comes to think of himself God and orders that divine honors shall be paid to himself alone. The graces of God abandons him. Ahriman is unchained and incites Zahak, who is Ajit Dahaka, who has become his instrument, to make war on Jamshid and then later is slain. But more, without reading through all of this, when it says that he reigns for 700 years here, um, that reign is organized into 50-year segments, and in those 50 years he spends mastering a certain craft that he either introduces or um, into society. Where is it? I looked at this a few days ago. But yeah, each of those 50 years he spends mastering a certain craft that he integrates into his kingdom, which is the entire world in this, which reminded me of Lou Samildanach and also Numa Pompilius, which I don't think we've talked about on any kind of streams or talks, where it's usually a Matraic function of the late arriving sovereign who remanifests all powers within himself. Um,
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
yeah, I wasn't able to. I guess this is a different version than what I found a few days ago, but that's essentially what like that stuff happens during his reign. Um, so he has a moment of hubris where he sees himself as God, and then he fails, and
Right.
Ahriman creates Sahak to saw him in half at the end, and that's where he is killed. And he's the son of Vivanghat, as it is saying up here.
Hmm.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
really it. It's kind of like a later
yeah,
poet trying to revive
yeah,
ancient
yeah,
Persian stuff.
yeah. Dumasil goes into so in the book, the what is it? The something of the king, the one about kings. I read it, but I forget. He has a different little title for each one, like the plight of a king or something. But anyways, he goes into the differences in the versions of Yima and Jamshid's story as it changes. Because, like you said, I think in the Shahnameh, it's more about him. He actually gets like a magical chariot that will fly him to the heavens. That kind of mytheme, where he's trying to like become greater than the gods or rule the heavens or the universe or something like that. He's trying to do this sort of thing, and he tumbles back down, and yeah, it's this sin of hubris more so, right? Of sort of a divine hubris, And so, yeah, we can kind of see this is a variation of why did Yima, Jamshid, why did he lose his divine favor? And there's a couple different sort of variations of how that story is told, whether it is telling a lie, and then that dishonesty kind of shades into hubris, okay, and becomes told in different ways, I think. And yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because it's also interesting because like Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata, he loses his divine floating chariot because of a half-truth, of a dishonesty in a sense, and they are overlapping. And so there's this sort of interchange as well between um, Mitraic and Yama type mythemes, as you were just alluding to as well. So there's that as well to think about. But yeah, I'll pull up I've got this document here, and it has some further ironic quotations that I want to look at. Okay. All right. So let's see. So, okay. Yash 19, we just went through that. The wanderings of the fortune, that's the Khvarena, are described. How it left Yima left Yima in the shape of the bird when he uttered a deceiving word. And the one lie and 3 departures of the fortune. So it's unclear there whether he does 3 lies or 1, and whether it departed 3 times or in 3 portions, etc. So there's an open question. We then have, let's see. His house is high on a hill and is where he requests it to be. The house moved wherever Yama wished. So this is, I guess, a little Yama mytheme in the Mahabharata, where Yama's house can be moved wherever he wished. I included this in these notes because Diarmid specifically requests the fate goddess, the sovereignty goddess rather, the hag. He requests that she place his house in a specific place where he requests it, and she makes it materialize. It's the same mytheme that sort of seems to transfer over. So that's interesting. Furthermore, back to Yima, the king's daughter tricks him into marrying her. He is exiled. He is then found in a tree and killed. And so this is one of the main ones I wanted to point to with the specific text references, because this again connects over to Diarmid, as we went through before. The same sort of sequence happens with Diarmid in the Irish tale. So the king's daughter tricked Yima into marrying her, and that is in this text, as noted. The princess bore the son Tur, ancestor of Rostam, according to Majmal al-Tawarik. The son, however, looked so much like his father that he generated suspicion that Jamshid himself was there, and the king therefore advised him to leave. He traveled to India, where he ruled 100 years, and on to China, where he was killed. Okay. All right. According to the Pazand Ayadgar Zama Spig, Wiwangahan had a pair of twins, Jam and Jami. So we can see that Yam and Yami are Yama and Yami. It's just like the Vedic version, but this is in an Iranic text. And Yam took Yami with him when he went into exile. And see also Persian Rivayats. Similarly, according to the Pahlavi Rivayat, after the loss of his kingship, Yam and his sister Yamag went into the Var in order to escape from humans and devs. When he was nowhere to be found in the world or in hell, Ahriman suggested he might be in the Var. Okay, so one thing that we kind of glossed over so far is Yma's var. This word W-A-R or V-A-R-A, vara. And this is Yma's famous enclosure. So in the Vendidad, I believe, and I'm not sure if I have this exact passage right here, or if we can find it and pull it up. If not, it's just a famous passage where the sort of cosmic winter is coming, and Ahura Mazda takes Yma aside and says, "Yma, you must create this enclosure, this var, and in this enclosure you must go and hide and sort of wait out the cosmic winter, right? And emerge and sort of be there to repopulate, right? It's this concept that we see in other mythemes, of course. It reminds of Noah and the Ark. It reminds of um, other world mythological mythemes that you may be able to think of, where he's the chosen human or a demigod, king, what have you, who will wait out the cataclysm of weather and in sort of a safe enclosed place and then come out. And so because of that, Yima gets repeatedly associated with his var. It's this safe enclosure space. And yeah, then this then comes into the same sort of this sort of world of imagery around Yima and Yama, that the tree of Yama is like this peaceful place where Yama goes. Yima, on the other hand, has an enclosure. What we find with Diarmid in the Irish case is that Diarmid goes to an enclosure of trees in a forest, and he goes there to escape from Finn's pursuit, Fionn McCool. Fionn McCool is pursuing Diarmid, and he's trying to find him. And he goes and he finds him in this enclosure of trees. He then chases Diarmid out of the enclosure, and finally Diarmid goes to a different tree in a different place. And after he's tracked down by Finn's men there, he climbs up in the tree to try to get away from them. And they basically try to jump up and get him while he's in the tree, and he defeats them all while he's in the tree. And then he essentially jumps down as they're cutting the tree down or something like that. Point is, in the Irish story, Finn is pursuing Diarmid, and Diarmid goes to this enclosure of trees, then to another tree that he climbs up. In this Ironic material that I just read, of course, it is Ahriman who is pursuing Yima and saying that he might be hiding in his enclosure, in his var, his famous enclosure, okay? And Ahriman is the equivalent of Fionn McCool. As also Azidahaka, the other enemy that we pointed to, Azidahaka is like a lower emanation of Ahriman, just like maybe the sons of Gaul or what have you. Fionn himself could be in the position of Azidahaka, but also the sons of Gaul are sort of emissaries that Fionn is using to pursue Diarmid, and those are kind of in the place of Azidahaka. So I think you can really see them mapping a similar pattern if you look at them in this way, when you understand the imagery of the enclosure and the imagery of the trees that Yima and Yama are associated with, and then the pursuit is specifically by Ahriman and Azidahaka in the Ironic material, just like the pursuit is by Fionn McCool and Gaul's sons in the Irish version. Okay, so like I said, they are both then found in a tree. According to the Fars Nama, this is a different text, and a poem on Jamshid among the Persian Rivayats. Jamshid was killed in China in a forest where he had hidden inside a tree, according to the Rivayat. Once again, he's heavily associated with this tree that he's found in. It reminds of Yama in his tree, and it very much reminds of the tree that Diarmid specifically is found hiding on top of. Okay, so then, of course, we have Diarmid, and we went into this again in our other stream that we discussed, Arno and I, and the others. We discussed this parallel in depth, but just to restate it, when Diarmid and Grania are escaping from Finn, and they go to the enclosure, they wait, they hide out there for a while. Finn confronts them there and essentially ends up driving them out. They have to escape with the help of another, and I think Angus or someone comes and helps them escape. But in any case, they then continue on, and they go to another little forest location where there is the bush of the berries that extend life indefinitely, and it is illegal to eat those berries, and they're guarded by a sort of giant who is a member of the Tuatha Dé Danann, but he's like a fearsome giant. And what happens is Fionn McCool, he wants to find Diarmid, of course, and he also wants to gain some of these berries, I think, in the story. So he sends the Sons of Gaul to go and do this mission, right? Locate Diarmid, find out about the berries. And the Sons of Gaul go and they find Grania. Grania is the consort of Diarmid. His wife, she's pregnant at the time with Diarmid's children, and they talk to Grania and say, hey, you guys should go get those berries, right? You really would like those berries. And Diarmid could go get them. And so they convince Grania to then ask Diarmid to go get the berries. It's very much, a comparable pattern to the Garden of Eden, once again, where the fruit of extended indefinite life are illegal. You're not supposed to pick them, and outside sort of what would you call, just sort of a dangerous figure, the Sons of Gaul. They are there, and they sort of sneakily put this idea to the wife that you need these berries and you should ask your husband to get them. And she's the pregnant wife. She wants the berries now, and so Diarmid has to go get them, of course, for her, and he does so, and then the Sons of Gaul get some of them from Diarmid as well. Because of this, they take the berries back to Fionn. Fionn is then able to he just smells the berries, and he can smell Diarmid's flesh on them, and because of that, he can zero in on where they are. He knows where they are now, basically. They've given up their location, and he knows what they've done as well, of course. And so then he is able to hunt them down there because of this. And at that point, he finds Diarmid in the tree, like I said. And there's an extended epilogue to that where he is not caught right away. But this is the sort of core that is similar to the Adam and Eve story. Like I said, Diarmid resists Grania at first, as also does Yama in the Yama and Yami hymn that I pointed to from the Rig Veda. Yama is resisting Yami, his sister, who's trying to entreat him to be her lover, right? He's resisting at first, but it seems that in the tradition he somehow gives up ultimately, because he gives up his mortality. Just like Diarmid resists Grania in asking for the berries, but he ultimately gives in. And this, in an extended way, it leads to Diarmid's death because Finn hunts him down. And then, for a time, Finn forgives him. But then while they're hunting together, Diarmid is wounded and, in some mortal way by a boar, and Finn refuses to heal him. So it ends up, because he gets caught by Finn, it leads to his death. And then we have the Rig Veda dialogue hymn featuring Yama and Yami has numerous details in common with the Pahlavi stories about Yam and Yami. Yami tries to convince Yama to sleep with her. arguing that the immortals wish the one mortal to have offspring. Already in the womb they were made by their engenderer Tvastar to be husband and wife. Yama resists, acknowledging that it may yet happen in coming generations that those closely related will perform that which is not proper for them. He hides out in a defensive enclosure, so I mentioned this as well, both a defensive enclosure as well as a tree. Yes, this is the passage mentioning that. Cut down a grove and made 7 doors. He settled in the midst of that wood. Who else cut the wood thus, and who made a close, warm enclosure thereof, with 7 tight, slender doors to it? So he specifically uses a word translated as enclosure. So that's interesting. After that, he drew near to one of the 7 wattled doors that there were in the enclosure and asked who was at it. This is like Yma's enclosure. Oh, here's the passage. Here is at least one of the passages mentioning the enclosure, right? Ahura Mazda and Yma called a meeting of gods and men, respectively, in which it was decided that the population of the earth must be reduced. This was to be achieved by severe winters, one particularly harsh one, followed by flooding when the snow melted, in order that living beings should not perish completely. Ahura Mazda described for Yma how to make a kind of fortress, vara, in which to keep samples of all creatures of Ahura Mazda alive during the winter. And the term vara has been thought to refer to some kind of enclosure. So he steals the forbidden fruit, directly leading to him getting caught. When they were come into the forest, Jirmid made a hunting booth in the very midst of the forest, and slew a wild deer that night, so that he and Grania ate and drank their fill of flesh and pure water. So they are allowed to hunt, it's not a problem, but they are not allowed to eat the berries, of course. Jirmid rose early and went to the Sherban Lachlanach, and made bonds of covenant and compact with him, and got from him the license to hunt. So he's like the giant guarding the bush. So a license to hunt and to chase, provided that he would never meddle with his berries. And they're called the berries of the quickened tree of Duvros. Here is the story of the origin of the berries. They are from the Tuadedanan. Let's see. For no disease or sickness seizes anyone that eats 3 berries of them, and they who eat feel the exhilaration of wine and the satisfying of old mead. And were it at the age of a century, he that tasted them would return again to be 30 years old. So they are extended life berries. And the thing we find is that the meat of Yma that he accesses, that is taboo meat, it also is the meat of extended life specifically. So we can see a continuity of these foods that they access, very, very perfectly aligned in that sense. When the Tuadedanan heard of these virtues belonging to the quickened tree, they sent a guard over it, etc., etc. And yes, the children of Morna, the sons of Morna, these are the berries that Finn asks of you, said Ashin. It is not easy to meddle with them. Okay, so that Finn and the Fionn dare not chase or hunt there for the dread of that terrible one. That's interesting. So Finn needs the sons of Gaul to go get them, and the sons of Gaul need Jirmid to go get them. And it's it's being passed along. So that's interesting. It's interesting because Finn really is, in a religious or theological sense, this is a story comparable to the Garden of Eden, right? But more extended. And Finn really is in this role of like the high god of the universe. So that's what's fascinating. And it says here, it's euhemerized into a legend, but it's saying that Finn has to ask for them to be gotten for him because he does not dare chase or hunt there for the dread of the giant who guards the berries. So it's kind of funny. When Finn outlawed me, Jirmid, and became my enemy, I got of him leave to hunt, provided that I should never meddle with the berries. Okay, and then Grania says, I vow that even if the children of Morna go not to seek the berries, I will never lie in thy bed unless I get a portion of them, although that is no fit thing for a woman to do, being pregnant. And I indeed am now heavy and pregnant, and I shall not live if I taste not those berries. So she's become, once the sons of Morna mention it to her, she gets this in her mind that she has to have the berries, basically. And then so there Ogrania said, Jirmid are the berries thou didst ask for. He goes and gets them. and do thou thyself pluck of them whatever pleases thee. Okay. And he's okay, right. He's telling her, you go get them yourself and eat them. Go get them. They're right there on the tree. Why don't you go get them? And she says, I swear that I will not taste a single berry of them, but the berry that thy hand shall pluck, O Diarmid. Thereupon Diarmid rose and stood and plucked the berries. Well, that was easy. But it's funny because, yeah, she makes him actually pick them with his own hands, and that's what causes Finn to be able to smell Diarmid's flesh, having touched them, and track them down. So it's all caused by this insistence. Take as many. So he gives them to the sons of Morna. Okay, so anyways, you get the idea here. You get the idea. It says, compare this to the Middle Persian translation of Yasna 9.1, where people are said to have become immortal by eating the meat of Yam. That's Jamshid, of course. Jam or Jamshid. They became immortal by eating the meat that Jam offered them. And in a story in the Persian Rivayats, also same thing, I guess, some Middle Persian texts specify that the immortality did not imply forever, only a very long time. The Menoi-i Njad 61.18 has 300 years, and the Pahlavi Videvdad 150 years. Right? Okay, so some other things to consider that, yeah, this has echoes into other folklore you can find about why death entered humanity. So that is something to compare this to. It's sort of the Indo-European version of this story of why death enters the lineage of mankind. We can see that Yama becomes this first mortal. He gives up his immortality, becomes a mortal, then fathers a lineage, which are human lineage. So then the humans descend from him. And so it's because of what he did that mortality, death, has entered the lineage. Same goes for Adam and Eve, of course. It's the same concept of this is why death has entered. And presumably that is sort of in the background of the Yama mythos, as we can see in these scattered mentions. Presumably we could read that into the Irish text as well, because when Diarmid dies, it's reported to his wife Grania that he's died, and she was pregnant with triplets, and she immediately gives birth over the side of the rampart she's on to 3 dead babies. So she's stricken with grief immediately, and she miscarries all 3 of her babies, and they come out as dead children. So it's kind of like implying that death has just taken over this family, and we could read into this, if it goes back to the same Yama concept, that they are kind of representing the point where mortality has entered, where death has entered the human lineage, perhaps. We can also then see that as we go into in our other stream, that the god Down is probably the same as Diarmid. Diarmid is Down, actually. And we have from a scholar or two here, we have this from R.A. Breatnach, that Diarmid originally was a deity is not open to doubt. He is to be identified with the well-known god Down, the lord of the pagan Irish happy otherworld, of whom widespread traditions survive. The genealogists make him Mac Doin Mac, son of Dunketh, Down, etc. Okay, but this is invention. He is frequently called Diarmid Down, which, as I think, is only an inversion of Down Diarmid, but whatever, the names are tied together anyways, meaning Down the unenvious. His surname Ojivnia marks his association with the Corcu Jivnia, the Ernian people who gave their name to the Corca Jivnia in West Kerry, unquote. And then we have from Gerard Murphy, we have, it is noteworthy also that Down was a god of the dead, C. Kuno Meyer, and that Diarmid, whose name means unenvious, is sometimes known as Diarmid Down. Example in Munster folklore, as on page 3 and 19 of the tale, listed as Helper Tale 11, infra page 180. And in the literature in the Agalav na Shanora by Stokes, sometimes as Giamad Mac Doin or as Jirmad Doin. And let's see, CF also Jirmed Ach Duin in a folktale from the Dingle Peninsula. Jirmed Mac Duin in a West Galway folktale. Du is the name of Jirmed's father in the oldest literary reference to him. Okay, so I just wanted to show that there's a bunch of different references and also a couple of different scholars who have commented on this, but there are a bunch of different folklore references where Jirmed's name is tied to Down. His canonical father is Du, which means just dark, like the dark one. So there's all these things that circle around because Du is like a synonym of down in a sense. Down also means dark. So these are like two different words for dark. So they could be both pointing in the same direction, I mean. And yeah, you've got to wonder about that. And also just the fact that Diarmid's mythos really maps well to Yma's, most of all, I think. I think as we just went through those passages, the pursuit of Diarmid is an incredibly uncanny, similar story to that of Yma and his being pursued by Ahriman and Azidahaka, and then having the meat of immortality or extended life, and all of that stuff, even being sort of seduced by the king's daughter and having to run away. That's what Diarmid does, essentially. And then when you look at, I've gone into this in recent videos, just how strong the parallel is of Down to Yama also, and of Down and Bran, the Welsh parallel taken together, and their parallel to Yama. So those are the main things in the Avestan material I'd like to cover. But in terms of the Celtic, you have to have this concept of Diarmid and Down and really be able to tie them together and look at their myths, their stories in combination, and treat them as if they are one continuous extended mythos. And you can see how both of them parallel these Yma and Yama figures in their own stories, and then combined, it's an even stronger picture. So, okay, any reflections on that long run of information there, or anything you found interesting?
Yeah, so I was looking through. Hold on a second, let me find something. There was.
And welcome, Josephus.
Oh yeah, hey, I didn't see you coming.
Good
So
evening, everyone.
I'm noticing a lot of similarities. So something else that's similar with Adam and Eve in the Norse pantheon. So when I believe in the Septuagint, Eve's name is rendered as Zoe, which is they're just translating the meaning of the name Eve into Greek. Both of them, Eve or Hawa and Zoe, mean life. And at Ragnarok, where the two humans that beget the human race in the next world after Ragnarok, who survive in Hodmimi's Holt, are named Lifthrasir and Leaf. The woman is named Leaf, which means life. And
Oh yeah,
I've mentioned this to you before. I don't think we ever really went into it. I'm not like trying to equate Yama as a god with like the first humans, but it's interesting that he has this abode in a tree in the underworld, and that humans also find refuge in this tree to survive the apocalypse or Armageddon. And then the first humans before that are also shaped from the tree, which is true in Iranian mythology as well. Mashia and Mashyana, as well as Askan Embla, are both the first two humans animated from a tree right after the separation of heaven and earth. And I'm just wondering, like, because obviously I'm not saying, like, that'd be like saying Mimir is Ask or Mashia is Yama. It's you can't really say that, but I just don't really know what's going on there. It's kind of unclear.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And some of these things kind of get shifted. I think we have what we should look at, of course, is Mimir. So, all right, what's the best way to bridge to that, other than we have the Fimbulwinter. We have so what we just went through was that Yima is the one who preserves, one of each animal or two of each animal or whatever it is, whatever I just read, in the enclosure during the Fimbulwinter that's going to destroy all life or reduce the numbers of living beings on Earth. And Yima is the one with the enclosure where he protects these beings to then repopulate. We then have a Fimbulwinter, a similar concept or identical concept in Norse material, with this winter that will wipe things out. And it seems that Lif and Lifthrasir that you just mentioned, they are the ones who survive the Fimbulwinter. Is that correct? Am I getting the details?
Yes.
And so they survive the Fimbulwinter in what? In Hodmimir's Holt. So there's this word, Hodmimis Holt. It's like, might as well
It means
just put
horde
this.
Mimir, and Mimir's name has to do with memory.
Yeah, so I'll just try to put this on the screen. Hodmimis Holt. So it's an epithet of Mimir. Mimis is Mimir, and Hod is horde. So he's known as, presumably he's Horde Mimir, unless, there's always a possibility with kennings that Horde Mimir is like naming a different god who's like the Mimir of hordes or something, right? The way that kennings work, you don't always have like 100% certainty, but it seems like it's just calling Mimir as Hod Mimir, presumably. And then Holt, it means like a grove of trees, a forest. So, and then did you say it can also potentially just mean tree? Like it can
Well, the
mean
actual
tree or
word
forest?
for wood, vidr, can refer to either a forest or a tree in the singular. I don't know about the word holt, but I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
it's
Okay.
regardless, it's not a ridiculous, it's, around the domain of trees, just
I
like
see.
the
I see.
Yarmouth.
Yeah. So, okay, let me just pull up the, shoot, what did I do? All right, here we go. Poetic Edda. Vafthrudnir small, and Vafthrudnir spoke. In Hodmimir's wood, that is Hodmimir's Holt, I shall hide. Sorry, that's not an I. In Hodmimir's Holt, shall hide themselves Lif and Lifthrasir then. The morning dews for meat they shall have, such food shall men then find. Okay, so the note there by Bello says, Snorri quotes this stanza, and Hodmimir's wood, this is the ash tree Yggdrasil, which is sometimes referred to as Mimir's tree because Mimir waters it from his well. Okay, so there's a close tie between Mimir and Yggdrasil. So it could be that Yggdrasil is Mimir's tree, Mimir's wood, or that Yggdrasil simply is in Mimir's wood, maybe. There's different ways you could kind of see this. CF Voluspa 27 and note Svipdagsmal 30 and note Hodmimir is presumably another name for Mimir. Lif means life, and Lifthrasir, sturdy of life. Nothing further is known of this pair, from whom the new race of men is to spring. Okay. Other interpretations I know argue against Hodmimir's Holt being Yggdrasil itself. There's a possibility there are some trees around Yggdrasil, near Yggdrasil, whatever. There are some trees that are belonging to Hodmimir, who presumably is Mimir. So we can presume ultimately that Mimir has some kind of little grove of trees, or it's just Yggdrasil itself. And in this grove of trees, or inside the tree Yggdrasil itself, Lif and Lithrasir, the two humans, are preserved during Fimbulwinter. So I just think remarkably it's a remarkably good parallel that the sort of enclosure associated with trees that we've seen this the enclosure is sometimes associated with trees. Um, it is labeled with no other name than Mimir himself. Mimir himself is then the one connected to this enclosure that preserves the humans during the Fimbulwinter. So this should suggest to us a strong basis for the possibility that Mimir is Yima, right? Okay, and so this was the argument of Victor Rydberg. He argued that Mimir is indeed the direct parallel of Yima because of this enclosure, because of this grove of trees, rather, or what have you. And he also argued that Mimir paralleled Soma, which I would say is he was extending things too far. I think he was incorrect and was getting a bit superficial or whatever. There, I think he was right when he did this comparison to Yima in particular, and that Mimir is the correct parallel of Yima. So the other thing that's interesting is that Jamshid has a famous giant cup, I think, right? It's called the Cup of Jamshid. In this cup, he can basically see the entire world, and it can then give him knowledge. He can remote view the world, and presumably there's other qualities of it, like perhaps prognostication or healing. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, do you guys recall exactly how Jamshid's cup works? I'm going to pull it up right here. Cup of Jamshid. And Josephus, you are muted. I don't know. You're probably not talking about it. Just so you know.
I mean, there's definitely a lot to go on. I don't know how to comment best, maybe on the Celto-Germanic stuff or the Avestan stuff, but I've the Greek and Roman stuff ready.
Okay, perfect.
So whenever you want, obviously, if you have anything else to say about that kind of topic, I'm all ears.
Okay, we'll continue with this a little bit, and then we'll bring you in for that stuff. That sounds good. So here is Cup of Jamshid. So this is interesting, of course, because Mimir has a well, and the well is a well of somehow Odin puts his eye in it, and he can have divine insight of some kind, right? He gets knowledge from the well. It's a well of knowledge. The Cup of Jamshid is this container of water belonging to this figure Jamshid, and it has so it does have an elixir of immortality and also scrying. So there is a divinatory power, scrying. That's clearly comparable to what Odin gets from Mimir's well, I think. And the whole world is reflected in it, so that he can do divinations and see the deep truths about the world. Very, very comparable, I think, to the well of Mimir once you kind of establish the possible link. Okay, so that is another strong thing, a well versus this giant cup. Do we have a picture? Well, anyways, okay. So, crystal globe. And what else? A goblet in my hand. From there, basically, I've gone into recently how we then have this possibility of the beheaded gods being equivalents of Yima. Yima is cut apart, as we saw, in a vague way. We then have these lines going to Mimir, very suggestive parallel that Mimir, the well-known beheaded god, could be this same type, and that gives us gives us an angle to investigate regarding other beheaded gods, because for one thing, we have a beheaded figure in the Irish legends called Down Bow. Down is the name of the god Down, of course, and then Bow means cow. So it's like his name means like dark cow, basically dark cow. But his name is Down, and he is a severed head. He's a figure who has his head severed, and the head continues to sing after he dies. Diarmid, on the other hand, when he dies, Angus goes to his corpse and breathes air into it and causes Diarmid's corpse to speak to him after it's dead. So there seems to be this theme around Down and Diarmid, where either a severed head survives after death, or the entire corpse and speaks after death and gives whatever conversation or knowledge, wisdom, or what have you. That again, that reflects back to Mimir, where Mimir is beheaded and his head speaks after death. You start to build this picture of this god type. And as I went into in a recent stream about the creation myth, we then have the Welsh figure Bran, and Bran is the severed head god who his head speaks after death, right? But Bran is also the ideal king in his cycle in the Mabinogi, so that he embodies the sovereignty in that story, just like Jamshid is this ideal sovereign. That's really his central role. But then when Bran dies, his head is severed and it goes on speaking afterwards and entertaining. And if I can find Branwen, daughter of Lear, I will just pull up a passage here where after the battle, of course, Bran's head is severed. He requests that it be taken to Harlech and be taken to the island of Gwales. Okay, is it like the Holy Grail? So is it like the Holy Grail? That's a good question. I think there's thematic overlaps and sort of an esoteric continuity with the Holy Grail, but it's not exactly the same. What does that mean? Exactly the same. So if there's esoteric overlaps, then perhaps it is exactly the same underneath, but it's not like the same exact myth or story narrative that he's involved. I don't know. I don't really know how to answer
there
that.
are older versions of King Arthur where instead of a grail, it's like a more of like a sacrificial meal. The grail came from like the chalice that Jesus drank out of at the Last Supper. So there was more pagan imagery in the Arthurian mythos before it became Christianized. And I think
Perhaps
might cause some confusion.
Yeah, in like the earliest version, there's like a platter. It's more like a platter. Okay, that's like the grail, perhaps. But in that platter, it's like a sacrificial procession, exactly like you said. But there probably is like a drink component of that, so it's probably not entirely inaccurate. There's like a large silver platter and then like a drink. But the thing about that is, I do think this is building from the Indo-European Soma cycle. So there is a central component about the sacred drink that's underlying even that early Grail image of the platter and the sacrificial procession. It's probably based on like the Celtic Soma sacrifice to begin with. So then that kind of comes through in the. But yeah, there's a lot of variations of the imagery so that it becomes hard to track, definitely. Okay. What I was gonna say though, let's see. I'm getting myself a bit too confused and turned around here, so I apologize. But let's remove this. Get this.
That's probably a good segue to Orpheus.
Yeah, let me just pull up. I just want to show Bran because this will show the final kind of Celtic piece is that Bran is this severed head god. It said, and Bendigeid Vran commanded them that they should cut off his head, and take you my head, said he, and bear it even unto the White Mount in London, and bury it there, with the face towards France. And a long time will you be upon the road, and you'll be feasting 7 years at Harlech. And all that time the head will be to you as pleasant company as it ever was when on my body. And at Gwales in Penvro you will be 80 years, and you may remain there, and the head with you uncorrupted until you open the door that looks toward Aberhenvelen and toward Cornwall. So you can see here they will stay at this feasting place, a very joyous place to be, with the severed head of Bran, until you open the locked door. So it's like, do not open this locked door, or after you open that door, you may no longer tarry there, and you will have to set forth and bury the head. Okay, so there is this sort of taboo, or this sort of rule about something will happen if you open this door. So then they go there, and they do as he said. Let's see. At the close of the 7th year, they went forth to Gwales, and they remained there 80 years. Okay, here it is. They were joyful, right? It's a very joyful place. All of them had seen and of all they had seen of food laid before them, and of all they had heard of, they remembered nothing, neither of that nor of any sorrow whatsoever. And there they remained 80 years, unconscious of having ever spent a time more joyous and mirthful. And they were not more weary than when they first came, neither did they, any of them, know the time they had been there. And it was not more irksome to them having the head with them than if Bendigeid Vran had been with them himself. And because of these 80 years, it was called the entertaining of the noble head. The entertaining of Branwen and Matholach was in that time they went to Ireland. Then one day said Hylin, the son of Gwyn, evil betide me if I do not open the door, to know if that is true which is said concerning it. So he opened the door and looked toward Cornwall and Aberhenvelen. And when they had looked, they were all conscious of all the evils they had ever sustained, and of all the friends and companions they had lost, and of all the misery that had befallen them, as if all had happened in that very spot, and especially of the fate of their lord. And because of the perturbation, they could not rest, but journeyed forth with the head toward London. And they buried the head in the White Mount, and when it was buried, this was the 3rd goodly concealment, and it was the 3rd ill-fated disclosure when it was disinterred, etc. Okay, so the point is, they go to this feasting place on the island of Gwales, where Bran has told them to take his head. And while they're there, they have the most joyous feasting time that they've ever heard of, and they forget all the cares, all the sorrows of the world and of their entire lives while they're there. But then there's this rule, if you open that door, this will, it'll all rush back. All the cares of the world will rush back, and you'll have to leave this place. And the person who opens the door is Hylin, the son of Gwyn. So I want you to remember that it is in the comparable story of Diarmid that we just discussed, what seems to lead to death entering the family of Diarmid, and of Diarmid being caught by Finn and forced out of his enclosure. He had been in the enclosure and then in the tree in the forest. What triggers this is there is a bush with berries on it that you're not supposed to eat, right? There's a rule against doing this. But the sons of Gaul, Macmorna, are the ones who push and pressure Grania to then get those berries and trigger that outcome, which leads to ultimately Diarmid dying, and then her miscarrying, right? All of that, all the sorrows that come with that, so to speak. So I want to say that, because Gaul is the equivalent of Gwyn, we have a consistent figure here, which is the idea that there's a role, let's say, in the Celtic mythos of the one who will break the sort of the rule that leads to sort of death and sorrows entering the, breaking the divine, the unperturbed state, what have you, associated with Bran/Diarmid. And yeah, it is consistently the son of the Finn/Gwyn type, because as we know, Gaul is just it's the other side of Finn. And so therefore Gaul is the equivalent of Gwyn, as we've gone into. And therefore, yeah, so Hylin seems to parallel the sons of Gaul, if that makes sense. Hylin is the one who opens the door of this heavenly location and causes the cares of the world to come back in. Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. So this would be like the Welsh equivalent of the sort of Adam and Eve moment, where it's like they're in Eden, but this Eden is a feasting hall. What forces them out of their feasting hall into the cares of the world is the opening the door, because his curiosity got the best of him, apparently, and so he caused them to have to go out of this paradisical feasting hall. Yeah, so I think those things kind of map, because if Bran is this Yama type, then his domain is this pleasant heaven, in a sense, this pleasant afterlife world that is this sort of Edenic place, as we saw in the Rig Veda hymns. We then also can see that Down, as I said, Down is Down and Diarmid are both the parallel here of Bran, but Down in the mythical layer is the one who dies, Aver Down, under the name Aver Down in the Sons of Mill story. He dies, and he, just like Bran, he requests his men to carry his remains. In this case, it's just his body. Carry his body to the island Techdwyn, and Techdwyn is then the island of Down. And it says that, in some sense, the descendants of Down have to go there after death, in a vague kind of sense. It may be like a sort of a waypoint. It may be who knows what. But it may be similar to how the men stop off at Bran's island here and then continue onward. I'm not sure. But yeah, all these things are kind of swirling, because when you look at the location of Gwales, where Bran's head is, it is off the southwest coast of Wales, like kind of one of the most distant points off the southwest there. And that's the exact same location as Techdwyn in relation to Ireland. And I showed this in my stream on the creation myth, that these are in comparable, almost exact same sort of positions. Techdwyn off the southwest tip, just like Gwales off the southwest tip. So then you can bring that all together and see that Aver Down does this same thing, where he dies. He's the first one to die arriving to Ireland, and he then requests that his body be taken to this southwest island, and then that people have to, when they die, they have to come to his island, at least temporarily. And comparably, when Bran dies, then he goes on this sort of pilgrimage to his island, and it's this paradisical place, but it's also has a sort of temporariness that it will be, you have to leave if there's this taboo broken. So all these myth themes kind of are shifted in different ways. It's fascinating. Just like Aver Down is like the first one to die among his men, Yama is famously the first of the gods to die because he gives up his mortality. All of these things kind of come in a very complicated way. They come into alignment. Okay, so yeah, I think we can move on from there, because the basic point comes across, I hope. And I do go into some of those details more in my creation myth sort of stream that I did in recent times. But we should go to some Greco-Roman stuff. And like I said at the beginning here, Josephus, in my chart, I have Orpheus as like the figure that to me has the strongest like mythemes that align mythically with these figures that I've gone into. But that doesn't mean that there aren't there isn't a kind of complication between Orpheus and Hades, right? Where Hades is really the one who's the lord of the underworld, and there may be a relationship like Diarmid is to Down. They're two parts of one. There may be a different relationship where one shifted into the position. There may be multiple underworld gods. That's something to sort of pick apart. But I did want to put forward the idea that we discussed in the past, that there's a lot of mythic overlap that has to be kind of addressed with Orpheus. One of those things is that basically Orpheus, the story sort of begins with Orpheus getting married to Eurydice, and she's bitten by a snake, like right at their wedding or something like that. And she dies. So to me, this is like death and the marriage to the woman are tied immediately together. Just like when Yama has children with Yami, presumably, that introduces death immediately. It's like their union and death are tied immediately. Eurydice then has to go to the underworld. Orpheus then goes and tries to retrieve her from the underworld, right? And this actually reminds me a lot of when Diarmid goes and tries to revive his first wife, who's not Diarmid. She's actually the sovereignty goddess. The sovereignty goddess, or hag, that comes to Diarmid first, and she kind of represents the Kvarena as well, that Yima loses. But she gets sick and has to go to the land under the wave or something. Like, she has to go beyond to like the underworld, essentially. And Diarmid tries to go pursue and bring her back. But then when he does, I think he has to like collect her drops of blood in this sort of magical little folklore element. And I think she says that, like, Diarmid, you don't really love me anymore, or something like that. And then I can't remember if he actually revives her and brings her back to life or not, but they go their separate ways ultimately, which is reminiscent also of the Orpheus thing. It's not a successful journey into the underworld to save the dead or dying wife, so that reminds me of Orpheus. And then there is material in the Yima text, which I guess I didn't come across in my notes there, but where he has to go into hell as well. So that's interesting.
Well, there's also the death by the serpent.
And the death by the serpent, yes, exactly. So I think that is important to keep in mind as well. The death by the serpent, that reminds of the role of Azidahaka, right? Is that what you would say? And the sons of Gaul is like the serpent, and the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Because we can say that the sons of Gaul are basically equivalent to Azidahaka, I think. And the sons of Gaul are in the exact role of the serpent, the tempter of the wife. It's like it's so identical. It's incredibly hard for me to not think the sons of Gaul are the Irish equivalent of the serpent. And we know that the Finn/Gaul type has a serpentine aspect that can come out, like in Facht and Afahak, seemingly. And we know that Odin and Rudra have a serpentine side. Okay, so it's well established. So it seems like there's this serpent role, and the serpent is what kills Orpheus's wife, Eurydice. Okay, so that's my basic argument, that all the pieces are kind of there in the Orpheus story to show, and then he gets beheaded, right? As the culmination of all of this, he gets beheaded, and then his head still sings, right? Is that accurate? And so he, in that sense, he's comparable to Down Bow, the singing severed head, or to Mimir, the speaking severed head, and all of that. So with that, it seems like the majority of the mythemes around this type are attached to Orpheus and not as much to Hades. But with that, that's just sort of a prompt for you, Josephus, to then you can go into how there are things with Hades that align with this, or if you think that there are distinctions to be made and all of that. So what would you say to that in terms of Hades or Orpheus or any of that? Or way obvious. Also go into the Roman stuff when you get a chance as well.
Yeah, definitely. So of course, the first thing that we have to point out is that there's no problem with Orpheus and Hades inheriting the same mythic material. We tend to see in Greek mythology maybe more so than in others, but I mean, we do have this pretty clearly also in Vedic mythology, and also Roman mythology to some degree. We do see that heroes tend to be human correspondents of a deity. Now, these exact relationship can be defined in various ways. So the human may be defined as an incarnation, a son, a cultic servant, depending on the various instances, or the relationship may just be left undefined and be entirely dependent upon context. The readers and listeners of the original myths would have probably figured out if a hero had some specific echo linking him or her to a particular god or goddess. So it's definitely possible for Orpheus to be the deity, well, the hero who corresponds to the deity Hades, right? There's no issue with that as a concept. He might not even be the only one who does so, but it's definitely possible. And it's also a trend, especially in Greek mythology, for the hero to inherit maybe the more complicated and morally gray aspects of a myth, right? It's a bit easier to accept that a hero um, is maybe, I don't know, being beheaded by Thracian women with the accusation that he is distracting the husbands from the women, than say the same of a deity, right? It's more acceptable of a hero, and so obviously the beheading of Orpheus is preserved, whereas there's no beheading of Hades, which is known from the sources. That being said, there's an interesting Roman parallel that also quotes a Greek source, so that we're going to get into that later. But definitely, yeah, I do think that there's a lot of material that Hades also has inherited from the original Yama. Obviously, in my understanding, Yama, it's relevant that Yama has been identified with Dharma, so the god of justice, by the time that the Mahabharata has been written down and formalized. As I was discussing with my professor with my thesis, right? The exact date of the Mahabharata's composition is such a painful issue to try to figure out. So I'm not trying to establish an exact chronology, but definitely we do have the notion of Yama, Vedic Yama, being conflated with Dharma. And also Mitra and Varuna are conflated with Dharma. And I think that the Iliad actually provides us with an appropriate parallel for Mitra, Varuna, and Yama conflating in some way or being closely related in another way, which is obviously the division of the universe between Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. So here, obviously, Poseidon is speaking, and he is trying to argue that he has the same honor as Zeus, and obviously to argue that he reminds that Kronos had three sons who are brothers, obviously begotten by Rhea. And so Zeus, Poseidon himself, and Hades, as we all know, of course, and they divide everything into three, and each one got one honor. So it could be understood as one portion or sovereignty over one portion of the universe. Obviously, Hades got the airy darkness, so implying, of course, the darkness of death. But some Stoics, especially, like to think that it actually meant the air that humans breathe, so the lower part of the atmosphere. Then obviously Zeus got the white sky and the in the fire and clouds, so the upper part of the atmosphere in the physical interpretation of Stoics. And then obviously, I mean, Poseidon gets the sea, and we do have the earth common to all and the big Olympus. So we have this sort of neutral ground between the various deities. So we can see Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades in the Iliad not as a hierarchy with Zeus on top and the other brothers besides or underneath. They can be understood as three sovereign gods in their own right, just being sovereigns over different parts of the known universe. So different domains, but equal power. And that is pretty much a good description of Mitra, Varuna, and Yama. Mitra over the day sky, Varuna over the night sky, and Yama over the realm of the dead. Each of them is the sovereign god in that context. Each of them is perfectly free and has the ultimate say over the matters of that realm. But that being said, they still can be understood as different aspects of the same Dharma god. And so this is obviously one of the arguments that I would bring up for Hades' identification with the other gods of the Yama type. I know that Dumézil was actually skeptical. Dumézil assumed that Hades and Poseidon as main gods were a non-Indo-European element that had sort of supplanted the Indo-European triads that he found in other peoples. I would argue that actually, no, this is also an Indo-European triad, just not the usual one, not the trifunctional one, but actually a triad of three sovereign gods that are all clearly first function gods in the Brazilian terms, right? So, I mean, I'm not going to go too in depth into the Orphic hymn to Hades here. Of course, the situation with Persephone and the pomegranate seeds, the pomegranate seeds that also mentioned in the hymn to Demeter, by the way, is, in my opinion, possibly reminiscent of the taboos on the berries that we mentioned earlier. So maybe there is some association between the food taboo and the underworld in general. At least in Greek religion, this is pretty closely mirrored in cultic practice. In ancient Greece, it was normal when sacrifices were made to the gods for humans to also partake in a portion of the sacrifice. So maybe if an animal was slaughtered, the meat would be divided between humans and the inedible parts would be offered to the gods. If vegetarian offerings were made, maybe a cup of wine or a loaf of bread would be given to the gods and equivalent food would be eaten by humans. But this was not acceptable for underworld deities. So it was pretty standard and pretty clear in Greek tradition that the food offered to the gods of the underworld was not to be eaten by human practitioners ever. Obviously, the idea is that cultic practice is a way to reconnect with the higher gods, and so obviously connecting with the lower gods would probably be not ideal, kind of a way to associate with death, darkness, not really what people usually seek from their religious or even more so theurgic practice. That also has some parallels in Rome, especially in the worship of the Mater Larum, so the mother of the souls of the ancestors. This goddess was honored by cooking her dinner and throwing the dinner off a cliff. This was done just outside Rome, and we have plenty of inscriptions documenting the worship of this goddess. So obviously, throwing the dinner off a cliff implies that obviously the dinner is not shared by human participants. So she's an underworld goddess, a bit like Hades conceptually, although obviously not a strict parallel. Now, I think that the main point about Yama in Vedic tradition is that he has a twin sister, Yami. We don't usually see that said about Hades in Greek mythology, but this was actually an incredibly, like, it's not the author one would expect, but this is actually reported by Euhemerus. Now, just for context, Euhemerus is the first of the Euhemerists that are named after him. So people who argued that gods are not actually metaphysical beings, but just human ancestors who lived and died among humans and were subsequently worshipped by their descendants. Now, the ironic part is that Euhemerus himself might not have believed into this version, in this understanding of mythology. He might not actually have believed gods to have been mortals. He clearly talks about this possibility in the context of a fantastic tale in which he visits a supposed island named Pankaya. And in the supposed island, he finds the supposed monuments attesting the mortal existence of gods, but there's no there's no way really to know whether the characters in Euhemerus' books reflect the author's opinions, just as characters in Platonic dialogues might not reflect the author's opinions. Whatever be the case, we do have an interesting passage about the twin sister of Pluto, Hades, the same god, however we want to name him. We don't have the Greek by Euhemerus. We do have the Latin translation by Ennius, one of the earliest Roman poets, and also in this case prose writers. And here we have it. So of course, Saturn marries Ops, that is standard mythology that we all know. We have a discussion of the various children that they have, of course, and we get to the third pregnancy of Ops. So on the third childbirth, Ops gave birth to twins, Pluto and Glauca. Pluto is called in Latin Dies Pater, literally wealthy father. Of course, Pluto is the Latin transcription of Greek Pluton, which means the wealthy one. So Dies Pater, the wealthy father, is an appropriate translation. But Ennius notes that others call him Orcus. So this is the word that also gave rise to ogre, the ogre of fairy tales. But this is also the usual standard word in Latin for the underworld, Orcus. In that case, they, of course, this implies Ops with help of Ceres, but still, they present the daughter Glauca to Saturn, but they hide the son Pluto and keep him hidden. So Glauca dies as a little child. Now, this is really interesting to me, and I mean to all of us, of course, because Glauca, as the twin sister of the god Pluto, is probably not mentioned in any other source. I can't really think of any source that is not Euhemerus or some quotation thereof. But we still have a really good parallel for Yama and Yami. So we have the twins. One of them happens to live, and the other happens to die prematurely. Of course, the one thing that's missing is their incestuous connotations, right? Yama and Yami in the Vedas are also lovers in some way, other than brother and sister. Whereas in this version, obviously Glauca dies as a child, and she obviously has no chance to develop such kind of relationship with Pluto, which is obviously Hades, the same god, just another name of the same god. And I feel like obviously it's interesting that Euhemerus was choosing the frame of gods being immortals and thus having the possibility of dying to introduce a figure such as Glauca, who obviously dies in a way which is possibly unfitting for gods in usual tales, but obviously would make sense for an underworld deity in the way that Yami is, of course. So that's definitely a piece of evidence to keep in mind. Also, this passage gives us the three most usual names for this god, for the god who was thought to be equivalent of Hades, and I would argue rightly so, in Latin. So, of course, Pluto, which is just a borrowing from a Greek name. So it's not exactly correct to say that Pluto is a Roman name as opposed to a transcription of a Greek name. Then we have Dies Pater, so the wealthy father. And then we have Orcus. But there's also another name, which is Weiois. Now, this is interesting. Weiois is clearly derived from Iois, which is the base of the name Jupiter, right? Jupiter then has genitive Iois and declines as if all the other forms derived from the nominative Iois and not from Jupiter, which is a compound of an old vocative, basically, the old vocative Dieu, and then the word pater, father sky or father daylight. Probably daylight is, more appropriate than sky. So Weiois is some derivative linguistically of Jupiter, but it's not exactly clear what, or at least it was not exactly clear to ancient Romans what the way was supposed to be. Cicero complains that he has no viable etymology for either Veiovis or Vulcan, like Volcanus, the god Vulcan. Um, so obviously this is his complaint, and Ovid seems to have an unusual solution. So here Ovid in the Fasti is talking about the nones of March. Nones are a day of the calendar that used to match the first quarter of the moon. In the later Julian calendar, it, it's usually the fifth or seventh day of the month. And so Ovid goes on to basically retell the youth of Jupiter, now clearly identified with the Greek Zeus, and concludes saying that Veiovis is presumably, but that's based on the etymology as he himself claims, or well, what he seems to think is the etymology. He thinks that Veiovis is just the young Jupiter, right? Now, this doesn't really make sense once you look at the earlier attestation of Veiovis in rituals, and specifically in the Carmen de Votionis, which means the song of self-sacrifice. I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be self-sacrifice, but historically this invocation was used only 2 or 3 times uh, in times of dire necessity by generals who sacrificed their own lives and the lives of all the enemies to the underworld gods in exchange for victory. That was considered an extreme measure, something that was obviously out of the ordinary, but clearly could be done. And who are the deities invoked in this context? Dis pater, Veiovis, and Manes. Now, dis pater we have seen already is the Greek Pluto calqued into Latin. Then we have Manes, which are the souls of the dead. So obviously a fitting category to invoke for a ritual concerned with dying and deaths in general. And then we have Veiovis. Now, a young Jupiter would probably not fit the role. We know that Jupiter's priest was not supposed to touch corpses, so you don't want the young Jupiter touching corpses or being in such a close contact with death. So we probably have to understand Veiovis in another manner that some ancient authors picked up. Ve should be understood as the opposite, the upside down version of something, right? So as the upside down version of Jupiter, Veiovis would be the ruler of darkness, the underworld, just as the opposite of Veiovis, which is Jupiter, Jupiter in Latin, happens to rule over light and the day sky. So obviously, well, Jupiter also rules about over the sky in general, and then we have Deus Fideus as his version in the daytime sky, and Sumanus or Nocturnus as his versions for the night sky. But still, Jupiter is pretty clearly associated with the sky, just as Veiovis is associated with the underworld, the other part of the world which is outside of our purview, right? The realm of the dead. Now, going back to the beheading part, actually we do have something interesting, but I have to find the text wherever it was in and it also has to do with the festival of Saturnalia, and here we have it. So in Macrobius' book, which is also titled Saturnalia or Saturnalia in Latin, obviously there's a discussion about the origin of the festival which is being celebrated and which is the framework for the whole book, for the series of books of the Saturnalia to take place. And apparently following Varro, which is a usual authority in ancient Roman religious issues, basically Macrobius is discussing the Pelasgian Pelasgian, so pre-Latin, pre-Greek tradition, by which a human had to be slaughtered in honor of Saturn, and the head had to be offered to Hades. And he also quotes these Greek verses here. They're probably, I mean, I've seen contrasting opinions as to whether they're particularly old or particularly recent. I don't think they're extremely old, but they're still interesting to look at. They were supposedly spoken by the Oracle of Dodona, which is one of the most authoritative ones in all of Greece. So the Oracle basically says to give the heads to Hades and to his father send the human. Now there's a whole issue when Hercules comes to Italy and finds that people there are following the Pelasgian custom, so beheading people and offering the head of the beheaded person to Hades and the body to Saturn. So he tries to find a way to avoid the human slaughtering that was going on. There are also other myths in which Hercules is tasked with stopping bloody human sacrifice. And in this specific issue, the way to fix the problem is by reinterpreting the text, right? So the sacrifice calls for heads to be offered to Hades, but it doesn't specify they have to be human heads. So the solution is to offer heads of garlic. I don't know whether it's idiomatic in English. It certainly is in Latin and to some degree in Italian today. But the head of garlic, right, is named the same way as the head of a human. It's just of garlic. So this is the way to appease the god without beheading any human. And as for the sacrifice to be made to Saturn, there's a play on the word pota. Pota is an accusative form, and it can actually answer to two different nominatives. One is pos, with an acute accent, and that means human, or usually a male human, usually a man. So it can be understood as the accusative of the word meaning man, but it can also be the accusative with a bit of it's a bit of a stretch grammatically, but it can also be the accusative of pos, which means light, which is a neuter, so it shouldn't have a distinct accusative from the nominative, but they kind of tried to reshape it into a masculine to make it make sense. And so this word means light. And this is taken as an explanation that for the traditional offering of beeswax candles to Saturn on his festival. So obviously, now regardless of the beeswax candles as a substitute for human lives, which also does make sense besides the wordplay, because ancient Romans thought that fire was a living being. They thought that quenching fire was tantamount to killing an animal or a human, so it makes sense besides the linguistics. But definitely the sacrifice of a head to Hades is, in my opinion, relevant to our comparative framework. So we have, as in many cases, a Roman tradition preserving an aspect of the original mythology through ritual, even after the narrative concerning that specific element had been lost, right? For instance, Romans did not really have any elaborate mythology on Vesta staying virgin, unlike the Greeks who developed or possibly preserved more elaborate mythology in which Hestia was wooed by various gods and refused them, right? But Romans still kept virgin priestesses for the goddess Vesta, which is their way of preserving the traditional association between this goddess and virginity. There are many other instances also in the cult of Juno, that especially the idea that Juno refuses the women who have extramarital relationships from touching her altar. So it's a cultic prescription. It's not a mythological prescription. As opposed to Greeks, I don't know if Greeks have any similar ritual prescription, but they do have plenty of mythology in which Hera is opposed to her husband's various lovers, right? So whereas Greeks may tend to preserve something as mythology, or maybe they also had it in ritual, but it only came down to us in the form of mythology. In the case of Romans, even when mythology was not exactly transparent anymore, they still kept the ritual pretty clearly. And so we can obviously compare the Roman ritual with the Greek and Indian and Celtic and Norse variants of the myth and see that there is an agreement between them. In this case, between the idea that beheading is associated with the god of the underworld. Now, obviously, here in these lines, which are supposed to be Greek, the recipient of the ritual is called Hades, or well, Hade in Greek. But we do have the explicit mention of Deus Pater as the god who receives the heads as a sacrifice, as the Latin name of this god, right? The name that Romans would have actually used outside of this purported oracle. So definitely, we do see plenty of elements in both the Greek Hades and the Roman Deus Pater or Orcus or Veiovis, which seem to be all names for the same deity. But we do see a pretty consistent set of elements that clearly place them in the same category as Yama and as other deities that we have been discussing in this stream.
Very nice. Yeah, so I think I see the picture that you're painting basically, and it is compelling, and also like it feels like some things have shifted or are buried more deeply in ritual and things like you mentioned. I definitely wonder about the brother and sister mention of. Did you say it was a twin that Pluto? Or was it Pluto has a twin? Or
Yeah, Pluto. Presumably, it's a Roman text, but it's presumably a word by word or overall faithful translation of Euhemerus, so Greek.
Yeah.
And yeah, Pluto has a female twin. So
a twin. Okay, so not just a sister, but a twin, right? So
yeah,
yeah,
specifically twin.
yeah, and that text is like from the 6th century. I mean, Euhemerus. When is Euhemerus from? You know. Well, I can
Okay, I'm
of course
looking
look
it
that
up,
up.
but it's from. Well, we actually don't have a pretty clear date, but presumably between the 4th and the 3rd century before before Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're still talking about something overall overall classical, like from the classical era of Greece at the very least.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. That is it's so interesting to me because 4th century. It's like in the middle there, so it could easily be. I never want to like discount something if it's not like the oldest of the old, and then it's still pretty old. And do we even have many mentions of Hades and specifics about him from earlier than the 4th century? Anyways, I wonder about like if Pindar discusses him much, or Homer or Hesiod, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think we have any evidence for the twin. We could try to look it up, but I'm pretty sure there is none.
Yeah.
It's also interesting. I mean, the twin sister is named Glauke, which is an adjective meaning dark blue, and we do know that dark blue and generally dark colors were common in the cultic practice related to Hades. Yeah, here we have no indication about this. Not even a dictionary entry for her name. Terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the entry, um, but apparently the name is shared with other figures, but the ones mentioned in the Iliad and the Theogony are just not the sister of Hades or Pluto or whomever.
Yeah. And then in general, what's your sense of how much narrative myth there is about Hades generally in between Hesiod and Homer and Pindar? Like he's probably most prominent in Hesiod, or what would you say out of those three?
So I think that it depends on what we define as Homer, because the Homeric hymn to
Mm.
Demeter is
Yes.
heavily focused on Hades.
Right,
Obviously, the
right.
myth
That's
of
like the
Demeter.
main. That's almost like the main one I would think of as his telling his myth, right?
Yeah, it is. It's the main source in archaic Greece that is dealing with Hades slash Pluto. The hymn says that he has many names, and of course, he does have many names. The hymn of the meter is definitely the main source. In the Iliad, he's frequently mentioned, but not usually discussed, not thoroughly at least. Obviously, he's mentioned because he's the ruler of the underworld, and obviously, people die a lot in the Iliad and in the Odyssey. And there is also a sense that Persephone has a lot of agency, especially in the Odyssey. She apparently has the power to grant souls the ability to retain their wits after dying. So she does seem to have an agency that Hades that does not necessarily take part in, which is interesting compared to the usual dynamics in, let's say, maybe of Zeus mastering over Hera. And also this idea that Persephone has a bit more agency than usual also appears in the Orpheus story. Persephone is obviously, as a woman, or well, as a female deity, is moved by Orpheus singing, and she is the one who sort of pressures Hades into releasing Eurydice. Although obviously this aspect of the myth may be um, underplayed or overplayed depending on the retelling. Of course, the old discussion of agency is a bit relative when it comes to myths. But still, we do see that Hades is a bit of a gloomy figure that is not really looked deeply into outside of the hymn to Demeter and a bunch of other passages. Even Hesiod doesn't really say too much. He does obviously mention very interesting details, such as his helmet of invisibility. So, does the helmet have anything to do with the concept of the head or of beheading being associated with Hades, or maybe is it us reading too much into it? Maybe I'm trying to read too much into it,
Hmm.
definitely. Um, but Hesiod does say something more maybe than the two traditional Homeric poems, but not really that much more. That is my sense
Right.
of understanding.
Right, right. Okay. Well, and then his name, or is it his name or an epithet that has a meaning relating to envious, the envious one, or I guess Hades has something to do with isn't his well, you tell me, what is there any meaning there
Well,
that's like the envious
envious is
envious
a cognate, but it's not a semantic match. So, right, it comes from the same root, but has developed a different meaning over time. So, the name Hades in classical Greek is Hades. Now, this is interesting because it's one of the few words that develops an aspiration, the H sound in the beginning, that is not actually original. So often in Homeric poems and early archaic poetry, and sometimes in later poetry trying to imitate the archaic poetry, we read Aides. So no aspiration, and we clearly see the diphthong, A, like the alpha and the iota, Aides.
Mm,
Now, this which is not a diphthong, is a hiatus. So it's a sequence of two vowels, each of them forming a different syllable. So we can easily assume that this form actually, when the gamma was still pronounced, was pronounced awides. So a could be understood, the alpha could be understood as a negative prefix. So not, or in English we would say an, as in un, right? The prefix that forms the negative version of any adjective. And then with could be understood as a derivative of the root with. So the root that means to see or to know. So a with would literally mean the one who is unseen. And so obviously the implication is that he is a hidden god. He is a god, obviously, of the underworld, so something that is not known to humans, where maybe there's no light to see even. So
Well,
that's
it's
yeah.
interesting that I was just bringing it up because Jirmid's name means unenvious. So it's interesting, you know, I guess Hades doesn't mean envious. That would be sort of like a weird opposite meaning, but also unenvious. Then you have unseen. I don't know if there's anything there or
Yeah, I
not.
mean, we would probably
Yeah.
have to look into the
Mhm,
etymology of that name,
mhm.
whether maybe it also has the root weed, regardless of the meaning
Yeah,
that it later ended up having. Now,
right.
obviously, Latin also has its own verb derived from the negative prefix and the root vid, which is in video, which means I envy, with
Hmm,
all the derivatives,
interesting.
including English envious. So they are
Okay.
still related. We still have to figure out
Oh,
whether
okay. Wow,
we
that's
have to
interesting
we
then.
have to figure out whether that name that you cited earlier
Yeah.
is also from the same root, or it's just a coincidence. Maybe only the negative prefix is in common with the name of Hades, right? It could be possible.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Those could be some more leads for the future. I got to get going by 3 o'clock here, so I was just gonna say that Yima does go to hell. Here's just my notes on that. 3 references in the narrative about Yima going to hell for his sins in order to close the door to hell so that he would be kept out. Uh, Interesting. And then, yeah, he goes to hell for his sins. So you can see that concept of him incurring sin and going to the realm of hell. It's similar to Yama incurring the sin, whatever. It's all this sort of continuous thing and going to the underworld. Um, yeah, I don't know if there was anything else you guys wanted to mention, Arno. Any
Actually, thinking
final
about the
thoughts?
name Unenvious, I'm sort of thinking about Eubulius, or in Greek Eubuleus, meaning the one who has a good mind or good willing. So
Hmm. Oh
maybe
yeah.
more similar in meaning, if not in
Ah,
shape, to Unenvious.
okay, I'll look up at Eubulius. I've definitely read about that. So yeah, thank you. Those are good leads. And here was that Rig Veda hymn. This is where Yama is. He chooses death in order to have progeny. That is Rig Veda 10.13.4, and it's really about, according to Jameson Raritan, it's about him choosing progeny. Not that he is being sacrificed in the sacrifice that's happening per se. Okay, so that's sort of like a confusion that sometimes happens. Anyways, I got to get going. I got a hard deadline to be at, and so yeah, thank you guys for discussing with me today. Hopefully, we mentioned everything that we wanted to, and yeah, I appreciate
Actually, just
appreciate you guys
one
being here.
one bomb that I need to drop.
Go for it.
Remus, of course, Remus is probably a homologue of Yama, and he explicitly, according to Ennius, auspicio se deovit. So he offers himself up for the sake of taking auspices, taking prediction
Ah,
about the future, and so that is a pretty close parallel to the self-sacrifice or true choice of death, if not a sacrifice, but a death
perfect.
of Yama.
Perfect. And yeah, we definitely think, Remus, Yima, that's probably a true connection, unlike that between Yima and Ymir. And so I'll leave it at that. And thank you guys for being here. Thanks to everyone for watching. Yeah. Have a great one, and hopefully discuss and stream again soon. All right.
All right. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for inviting us, and see you next week for
All right.
another stream.
All right. Great. See you next time. Bye.